Book 5 is probably one of the most important in the novel. In some places, Book 5 is published by itself. You see the cover there, the Grand Inquisitor, and it's published in connection with Book 6 occasionally, so that you have these chapters going together. At the beginning of Book 5, we hear Alyosha explaining to Lisa, who is herself a young child, that Zosima says, "Consider what contempt can there be if we ourselves are just the same as he is. If everyone is just the same as he is." So what Alyosha is saying here is that following his elder's advice, what if we looked at people like children, like they are the same as we are, that they need help, they want to be loved, and Alyosha then is going to get to practice this with his brother. The brothers are going to get acquainted. They accidentally run into one another. Alyosha is looking for Dmitri but finds Ivan, and Ivan is in a tavern and he's eating and drinking, and he invites Alyosha to come up and join him. And Ivan confesses in these long rambling words, "I want to live, and I do live, even if it against logic." Right? Again, we have the rationalist. He's struggling with some sort of logical problem, but he wants to live. He says, "I do believe in the order of things, the sticky little leaves that come in spring." Doesn't that sound like the romantic? He has the romantic impulse in him from his brother. "I want to go to Europe. I know I'll only be going to a graveyard, but still, I want to go to Europe. Sticky spring leaves," and he says this again, "and the blue sky, I love them, that's all. Such things you love, not with your mind, not with logic, but with your inside, your guts. You love your first young strength. Do you understand this?" And he laughs. So he's still feeling this division within him that Dmitri's feeling as well. The pull between understanding things as a rationalist or understanding things as a romantic. And the two of them begin talking, and what comes out is that Ivan plans to kill himself when he's 30, that he will throw the cup of life to the ground and say he's done with it. Why? He wants to die in all his strength. Again, somewhat romantic, right? To give up his life in the height of its strength and say no more, and have drunk all the cup of pleasure and be done with it. Which of course horrifies Alyosha, who could not imagine such a choice to be made. And this begins a dialogue between whether or not Ivan believes in God. And Ivan starts explaining, "Yes, I accept God, pure and simple. In accordance with Euclidean geometry, God exists and created the earth. And he created human reason with a conception of these 3 dimensions of space. I humbly confess that I don't have any way of understanding or resolving these bigger questions, such as, why does suffering happen? For I have only a Euclidean mind," he repeats this several times, "an earthly mind, and I cannot resolve things that are not of this world." So what is he confessing to? He believes that man has invented God, and that by inventing God, he is trying to answer the bigger questions about why there's evil in the world. So he says that he accepts God, but at the same time doesn't live as though he accepts God. And what he says is the reason why is he does not accept the world of gods. "I do not admit it at all, though I know it exists. It's not God that I do not accept, you understand. It is the world of gods, created by God, that I do not accept and cannot agree to accept. With one reservation, that I have a childlike conviction that these sufferings will be healed and smoothed over, and that the whole offensive comedy of human contradictions will disappear like a pitiful mirage, a vile concoction of man's Euclidean mind, feeble and puny as an atom, and that ultimately, at the world's finale, in the moment of eternal harmony, there will occur and be revealed something so precious that it will suffice for all hearts, to allay all indignation, to redeem all human villainy, all bloodshed. It will suffice not only to make forgiveness possible, but also to justify everything that has happened with men. Let all of this come true and be revealed, but I do not accept it and do not want to accept it." Wow. What is his complaint? He says that he believes that all will be made right. All of the problems of earth will be made right, and still he does not accept it. And he will begin to tell us why. Before he tells us why, his rebellion is really going to be a litany of the suffering of children, and we'll look at that. But before that, I think we should pay close attention to this connection between the beginning of book 5, in which Alyosha was talking to Lisa, and the elder said, you need to see yourself in other people, and that all people want to be healed like little children. And here Ivan says, perhaps I want to be healed like you, and smiles just like a meek little boy. That's how he begins. So we have to pay attention to what the text is saying. This is not someone who is just attacking Alyosha. He is coming to Alyosha with his problem. And the problem is the suffering of children, and it is the problem in the text. It's the problem that we know our author feels, that he has just lost his own son, Alyosha, and that he is trying to understand how this loss could have happened. And these are true accounts that Dostoevsky drew from the newspapers, though he elaborates and gives them lots of details. And as Alyosha listens, he says, I want to suffer too. I want to listen to these and feel their pain. He also feels that he has a little devil in his heart, in which at one point Ivan asks Alyosha during a tale what should have been done to these murderers, to these evil people that hurt these children. And Alyosha says, shoot them. So there's some reality to his character. He's not so saintly that he doesn't feel how right it would be to get justice on these people. But as Ivan finishes, Alyosha drops his eyes at the end of this list of litany of suffering children and says, Alyosha says, this is rebellion. He says it softly with his dropped eyes. And Ivanyan says, I don't like hearing this word. One cannot live by rebellion, and I want to live. But I most respectfully return the ticket. And that's Ivan's famous line, I return the ticket, right? I do not accept God's world. I do not accept that I will have eternal harmony if children suffer. It does not pay for it. He doesn't feel like the debt has been paid. And then he writes a poem. I talked about how in the beginning, from the author, we get to hear from Dostoevsky, who's inviting us into the story and asking us what we think and what we feel. And what we have in the Grand Inquisitor is a very different kind of author. We have more of a romantic writer. We have someone who is writing this Grand Inquisitor character from a place of rebellion, and therefore he's not imitating virtues here. He's not imitating Zosima's hospitality or Dostoevsky's hospitality as a writer. He actually tries to control his brother's response to things. He will tell him, here's the best parts. This is what I hope people would take from this. You'll see what a writer I am. And he says constantly, he puts it in the context of other poetic works. So Ivan is trying to control our opinion. So we can't say that the Grand Inquisitor section is written by Dostoevsky. We have to understand it's being written by Ivan, who is struggling with his romantic temptations and his rationalist expectations, his Euclidean mind, so to speak, and creating this character. What happens is the second return of Christ. And Christ comes back, and let's look at him. The action is set in Spain, in Seville. And Ivan says, in the most horrible time of the Inquisition, when fires blazed every day to the glory of God. Well, of course, they're not to the glory of God, because what are the blazes? They are heretics being burnt. And of course, this is not the coming in which he will appear, Ivan says, according to his promise at the end of time of heavenly glory. No, he desired to visit his children, if only for a moment, and precisely where the fires of the heretics had begun to crackle. In his infinite mercy, and you get this sense that he's using these phrases almost in jest. And remember how Fyodor earlier exclaimed after Adelaida died, he said, now let the soul of thy servant depart in peace, right? He's quoting from the Bible but misusing it, and Ivan falls to that temptation as well. So Christ descends to come into this time period, into the court of the Cardinal Grand Inquisitor, who had burned almost 100 heretics to the glory of God, ad majorem gloriam Dei, right before. And everyone recognizes Christ. Now that's also interesting because, as we know in Scripture, right, he enters the world and the world does not recognize him. Ivan is not a biblical writer. He does not parallel the biblical writers well. And he, again, look at his inclusions as a narrator. Ivan says, this could be one of the best passages in the poem. Why it is exactly that they recognize him. People are drawn to him by the invincible force. They flock to him, surround him, follow him. The sun of love shines in his heart. Rays of light, enlightenment, and power and stream from his eyes and pour over the people. So what does Christ look like? He is a shining ray of light and power. He's very abstract. He's a monophysite Christ. He's a Christ without features, without incarnation. He is almost a floating spirit that is recognized by the people. In other words, he is what the people want. And we know that that's not Christ. Christ comes into the dirt, into the mess, and scandalizes people instead. So this is not, Ivan's not a biblical writer. He doesn't imitate those who are virtuous writers. And then he writes a Christ that doesn't imitate the scriptures. But what happens? The Grand Inquisitor crosses the square. But listen to all of his features. He is much more concrete. An old man, almost 90, tall and straight, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes from which a glitter still shines like a fiery spark. He's not wearing his robes, which he had displayed himself to the people the day before. No, he's wearing only his old, coarse, monastic cassock. Now listen to this. He has thick gray eyebrows. He has fiery eyes. He's almost 90, tall and gaunt, and we know what he's wearing. As opposed to this Christ with the sun of love shining out of his heart and rays of light and enlightenment, power streaming from his eyes. The contrast is clear. We have a very spiritual, ethereal, abstract Christ and a very real, earthly, concrete Grand Inquisitor. Someone who actually has the power to get things done and do things. We have a contrast between these two, but it also shows the dichotomy that is taking place inside of Ivan's character. Ivan himself wants a Christ who can rescue, and so he creates this Grand Inquisitor character who spent time in the desert, time imitating John the Baptist and following the religious ways, only to find it was meaningless to help people. From his perspective, the greatest mistake that Christ made was to not accept the temptations of the devil. So what were those temptations? The way that Ivan writes them in the Grand Inquisitor is he talks about them in terms of miracle, mystery, and authority. What we have is a Grand Inquisitor who's going to replace these temptations. He's going to follow the devil. The devil was the wise character in the story between Jesus and the tempter. And the devil offered the power to give people bread, right, to feed them, bread and circuses, miracle to give them a show, right, and authority to tell them what to do. This is what they want. The people they want the glimmer and they want the show. They want to be entertained, and they want to know where their next meal is coming from. And then whoever gives them their next meal, that is who they're going to follow. That is the person that they are going to listen to and do what that person says. And so the Grand Inquisitor is helping them because he tells Jesus that Jesus, this figure is actually not called Jesus, this Christ figure. He tells this Christ figure that you didn't save them. You didn't feed them. You didn't tell them what to do. And by not telling them what to do, you gave them a freedom they weren't ready for and they weren't able to live up to. And so what he says is, we who took the sins, meaning the Inquisitors, who took these people's sins upon ourselves for their happiness, we will stand before you and say, judge us if you can and if you dare. Know that I am not afraid of you, and that I was in the wilderness too, and I ate locusts and roots, and I was blessed freedom, which you have blessed mankind, and I was preparing to enter the number of your chosen ones, the number of the strong and mighty, with a thirst that the number be complete. But I awoke and did not want to serve madness. I'll go back to that. I returned and joined the host of those who have corrected your deed. I left the proud and returned to the humble for the happiness of the humble. What I'm telling you, what I'm telling you will come true, and our kingdom will be established. Tomorrow, I repeat, you will see this obedient flock will rush to heap hot coals around your stake and I will burn you for having come to interfere with us. If anyone has ever deserved our stake, it is you, and tomorrow I shall burn you. Wow. So what we have here is the same position Ivan is taking. Ivan creates this list of suffering children in order to judge God and show that God was an inadequate ruler of the universe because he let all these children die. So he's judging God, and he's taking his place in the universe above God. We have the Grand Inquisitor doing the same thing. He is judging God and saying, you gave them too much freedom, you didn't know what you were doing, and we're going to fix it. We're going to make it better. We're going to make these people happy. They are going to feel happy because we've taken away enough of their freedom so that they feel safe, they feel secure, they don't feel lost and confused anymore. And we've given them bread so they no longer go hungry, which is all they really want. They just want to be pleased and entertained, and their freedom taken away. And this is the scariest passage in the book, because of course this is what happens in communist Russia, and I would say that it happens in most places in the world right now with these kinds of rulers, in which you have rulers taking away the freedom of the people and assuming that people cannot handle freedom, which a lot of people can't handle freedom, and but that's not why you take it away. What you actually do is you turn it over to the Lord, and you teach people and you educate, but that's a longer story. And instead we just give them bread and we turn their Netflix on, and then they don't notice that they're actually unhappy and feeling lost and suicidal, and they don't know what their life is for. So this passage, I think, still speaks to us today. I think it's still true even more than 100 years after it was written. Alyosha's response is that your poem praises Jesus, it doesn't revile him. And notice that he says Jesus. Alyosha says Jesus, whereas the poem does not. So we have the historical Jesus being recognized here. It doesn't revile him. And who will believe you about freedom? Is that any way to understand? It's a far cry from the Orthodox idea. It's not even the Roman idea. So what he's saying, I mean, he gets really excited here, right? He gets really passionate about his own faith, and he wants to immediately start poking holes in Ivan's poem. And Ivan's just laughing, like, it's just a poem, it's no big deal. And he says, well, how does your poem end? And what happens is that the Christ doesn't say anything. The silence weighs on the moment, and the captive has listened to him all the while intently and calmly, looking at him straight in the eye and not wishing to contradict anything. And the old man would have liked him to say something, even something bitter and terrible, but suddenly Christ approaches the old man in silence and gently kisses him on his bloodless 90-year-old lips. That is the whole answer, and the old man shudders. Something stirs at the corner of his mouth. He opens the door and says, "Go, do not come again." And the prisoner goes away. The old man then, what happens to him? The kiss burns in his heart, and the old man holds to his former idea. Now, what? Why that ending to this scene? I think it's the absolute perfect ending to this moment. I think actually Ivan has written a perfect ending to this moment, and it gives me great hope. Whereas before, if the poem ended just with the Grand Inquisitor saying, "We will burn you tomorrow at the stake," I don't know if I would have had any hope for Ivan. But then we add this scene in which Christ doesn't speak, but his silence is speaking volumes. The silence is weighing on the Grand Inquisitor. He's ready to be refuted. He's ready to be attacked, because that's the way that the world works, is by refuting and attacking. And instead, something very concrete happens. His spiritual Christ does something real and earthly and kisses him on the mouth. He does not reject him. He shows him love. He doesn't tell him that he's wrong. He doesn't give him all the reasons that the worldview of the Christians is better. He shows him love. And even the fact that he listens to him has been showing him love this whole time. That Christ, instead of objecting, has been kenotic in this way, right? Look at Philippians 2, that he came down, not considering equality with God something to be grasped, but became lowered even to the point of dying on the cross. We have a God who we worship who is willing to be humiliated and suffered and to empty himself before other people. And this is how Christ listens to the Grand Inquisitor. It's also parallel how Alyosha has been listening to Ivan. He's been listening and hearing his brother out. And then his response is he gets up and he kisses his brother on the lips. And Ivan laughs delightedly and says, plagiarism. But it's wonderful. Alyosha realizes too, the way to counteract Ivan's diatribe against God with all of its proof about suffering is to show love. And it's the one thing Ivan has not thought to do. He loves humanity like the woman of little faith. He doesn't love people individually. And he says that he finds he can't love them. It's just what Madame Koklikov said, right? That she can't love people individually. So this show of individual love counteracts this diatribe in protest of God's ungenerosity, of God's lack of goodness, of God's inability to run the universe well. And instead, we have these kenotic figures saying that they will love, even in the mystery of this big question that seems to go unanswered.